You said before that a strong economy without a strong community, it just doesn't work. You have to have that strong economy for a strong community. How does the housing affordability fit into that equation for Metro Atlanta and from where you sit as CEO of the Chamber?
Yeah, so let me set the table. I think many of you are probably familiar with the Metro Atlanta Chamber, but if you're not, we have been around for 166 years. And we represent 29 counties, so we aren't just the city of Atlanta. We represent basically North Georgia. And we exist for economic investment and economic growth. So there's a lot of things that catalyze that growth, right? You have to have good public policy, you have to have a great business climate, and then you also have to have great talent, which gets into the affordability issue and housing. So if you think about economic development, it used to be what we would hear from companies that were looking to expand or move and locate here. It used to be about traffic, right? Like, tell me how my employees and my goods are going to get around the region. And then it went to, tell me where my labor is. Like, can they fill the jobs? I'm looking for these certain skills. Do they exist here? And by the way, they do. So if anybody wants to know, we have the most diverse talent base of any major metro in the nation. But now what they're asking is, can my employees afford to live within a certain radius of where their job is? Can they afford to live? We've never had that before. So we're very used to working on the issues around things like water supply or education or transportation infrastructure. We've never ever thought about housing. It's just not been one of those things. So this is new to us because it becomes economic competitiveness now. So while a lot of us think about it as a social issue, right, because it certainly impacts a broad segment of our community, this is really about a strong business climate. So from a Metro Atlanta Chamber perspective, this is important for an economic competitiveness issue.
You mentioned the 29 county region.
Yeah.
How do you manage all that? And your job as a chamber is to kind of connect people, put the people at the table. What does that look like because of the vastness of the Metro Atlanta area, but also in these really important issues that you said maybe we're looking at it for the first time from your perspective?
Yeah, well, one of the superpowers, that's how we talk about it at the Chamber, is our ability to convene and connect individuals, right? So when we think about leaning in on an issue like housing, we start to ask the question, what does it look like across the region? First, we got to start with data. I mean, you can't start talking about an issue unless you understand the foundational data that exists. Two, who are the players? Who's already thinking about this? We don't own the issue. There's a lot of really smart people in this region that have already been thinking about this for a long period of time. How do we get to them to the table? And then three, how do you get the people who make decisions to sit down at that same table? And that is fundamentally important. And I think we can do that. So when you look around the 29 county region, you have entities like the city of Atlanta. We heard Courtney speak. A powerful force in this region because it is the capital of the state of Georgia. But then you can look at entities like the Atlanta Regional Commission, which represent, I think, 14 counties now. I always get the number wrong. And they are doing a lot of housing work with their local governments that are part of ARC. You've got our universities that have really brilliant individuals studying these topics. And you can't overlook our HBCUs, which certainly understand the impact on a broad segment of our population that they are training and teaching. And so we can pull those people together to a table and begin a conversation about what do we have to change? Business, civic, public, philanthropy, how do we change the trajectory? And I can tell you this, if Atlanta gets it right, which by the way, I'm an optimist. I believe Atlanta always wins. We will set the standard for the rest of the nation because we are not the only ones dealing with this. Every major metro has an affordability crisis. And I'll end by saying that you can look at the recent elections and see that it was about affordability. Democrat, Republican, it was about affordability issues.
How do you get them all at the table? You give them free food? What are we doing? Open bar situation?
Well, look, we have some great companies here, like Chick-fil-A. If you serve Chick-fil-A, they show up. No, I think it's when you set a good agenda, when you bring the right people together and show who is actually committed to this issue, people show up.
Right. Can you share an example maybe of how a collaboration across business and government actually worked? Do you have any success stories?
Well, we do. How many of you are familiar with Grady Hospital? Right? All of us are. Grady in 2007 was facing bankruptcy and a closure. They were 60 days from closing. Grady is a public institution. It is owned by the people. It also serves the most vulnerable of our population. And so it was too important to let that institution fail. And so the business community worked with the public sector, came together. It was not easy, because this was not just a business issue. It was a community issue. It was a social issue. But got together around a table and hammered out what a new governance and fiscal structure could look like at Grady. And if you have noticed over the last 15, 20 years, Grady has soared. The investment in that hospital has really blossomed. And within, I think, a month of us finalizing the recommendations, $350 million of philanthropic dollars went to Grady, and that has continued over the last 14 years. So it's an excellent illustration of how public and private can come together around difficult issues and solve problems. And by the way, that's Atlanta's superpower. We do this really, really well.
You mentioned attracting and retaining talent.
Yeah.
How is that, the housing challenge, intersected with that, with your work on workforce and competitiveness?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we think about job creation and economic investment, we've always thought about, okay, well, do we have the transportation infrastructure? Do we have the roads? Do you have the curb cuts? Can they put a sign on their building? I mean, there's all of these things that go into economic investment. When you think about jobs, for every 2 jobs that are created, you need 1 house. Think about that. Every 2 jobs, you need 1 home, right? So it can be a rental home, it can be a room, it can be a 3-bedroom house, it can be a $6 million house. But I don't think we've ever thought about that from an economic development standpoint. We've thought about talent, we've thought about infrastructure, sewer, water, but I'm not sure at the local level, which housing starts and ends at the local level, we've never thought about, do we have the housing supply for the labor that needs to feed this new business that's coming into our area? And so we are beginning to think about, how does the business community influence, get the local elected officials to the table to begin having this conversation about, what do we change? Because we have to have more housing, full stop. If you look at the United States, we're 4 million roughly houses behind. That's a 30-year supply 30-year problem. You can't solve that in 1 year. So we have to think about infill. We have to think about density. We got to think about vertical. But we also have to think about 3-bedroom rental homes. I mean, there's this whole wide stock that has to be built. And if we don't get that right, if we don't get the housing right, then it's going to impact our economic competitiveness. And so that's how we think about it. But if there's one takeaway for all of you, every 2 jobs, you need 1 home. How do we do that? That's the real question.
Right. You've led initiatives like ATL Action for Racial Equality or Equity.
Racial equity.
Yeah, and which frame, an inclusion as an economic imperative. How does, through that lens, apply to the housing conversation?
That's easy. I mean, it's 100%, right? Because inclusion is not just about race or gender or sex. It's making sure that you have a community where you belong. And so we have to make sure our communities are vibrant, that they work for everyone, whether or not you're just coming out of college, whether or not you're a high school graduate and you're becoming a welder, whether or not you're a retiree and you need to be able to maybe downsize and live in the place where you have raised your children. And I see everybody's got sun in their eyes. It just came up. Now, look, I have aging parents. That is where I am in life. And thinking about, they have a strong community. How do I make sure they can stay in the house as long as they can? I mean, these are all, to me, existential questions that we have to ask ourselves. And so when we think about equity, this is equity for all of us. And talent, we have the most diverse talent base in the United States right here in the Metro Atlanta region. We have to make sure they can live, work, and raise a family where they also have a job. So super important for us. And we're on the front end of this curve. We don't have the solutions yet. That's one thing I'll say, but now we're invested in helping find those solutions.
Is that one of the biggest shifts that you see, or what is the biggest shift over the next 5 years, whether it's mindset, policy, collaboration, that would make the biggest difference?
I think policy always drives outcomes. So we have to get our policymakers to really understand what's needed. And one thing I will say too, though, it's not just policymakers, it's every one of you in this room. we actually collectively become the NIMBYs. We're the not in my backyard. Like, it's great in your neighborhood, but not in my neighborhood, right? I want it there, not here. And so we also have to work on changing the mindset of our neighbors about how do we house our workforce, right? I need somebody to serve me at a restaurant, and they want that job. You know, I need a firefighter that's gonna come to my house in a quick time frame. I need a teacher teaching my kids, but I also need an electrical engineer and a computer scientist doing this work. And so we have to make sure those communities work for everyone.
Well, and our last question, I want to talk about football. I want to talk about FIFA. I want to talk about Auburn.
We can sit up here forever.
Right, in Georgia, but
no.
What get? Well, you got two.
Sorry, I had 2 kids at Georgia,
Yeah,
so there you go.
An
But I'm an Auburn grad.
So yeah, exactly. So, but what gives you hope? Finally, what really gives you hope? You mentioned Atlanta's superpower. Like, when you look at this, like, how attainable is this?
Really attainable. I am an ever the optimist. I'm a half full kind of girl. That's just where I live. And you can look at the history of this city and this region and see how we have overcome challenges throughout time. And it really is the superpower. I hear this from CEOs all the time when they move into the Metro Atlanta community. Their first comment is, wow, I didn't know that I was going to be held to a standard that we call civic rent. You are by your peers, not by elected officials. Your peers will say, you have to give back. You have to be involved in the community. You have to help solve these problems. And they've never been in a community like that before, where they're sitting maybe with a competitor, but they're putting that aside to help solve the problems. And I think we have an incredible just civic responsibility and ethos here that require us to not leave those behind, but to also help us grow. We're about to celebrate 30 years of post-Olympics next summer while we're hosting the World Cup. I told you I would get that in. And by the way, that means, why do we have the World Cup? Well, certainly it's the world's largest sporting event. It showcases our stadium beautifully. But what it does is it sets us up for another 30 years of success. So how are we going to respond to that? How do we plan for it? And how do we make some of the difficult decisions that some people may not be willing to do? And if you think about building stadiums, I'll end on this. People are oftentimes against building a stadium, and then 20 years later they look back and they go, wow, it's really delivering on what it needed to. You can look at the battery and what it has done for Cobb County, et cetera. And so difficult decisions and difficult choices are what Atlanta and this region can do well. So I'm optimist.
There you go. Well, great note to end on. Thanks, Katie.
You're welcome.
For joining us.